Dear delegates of the J Street Annual Conference, welcome all of you to Washington. This is a very important event. You are friends of Israel and you support one of the most important interests of the State of Israel, which is to reach peace with the Palestinians. I'm especially proud of the fact that so many young Jewish leaders are gathered here in Washington. And I want to congratulate you here from Jerusalem and wish you best in this very important conference. On both sides of the ocean, in Israel and in the United States, liberal forces find themselves asking questions and under attack. And liberal forces who believe in civil liberties, in peace, in coexistence, in equality among human beings, are feeling threatened. And therefore, this is the opportunity also to say we are strong together. In 2 months' time, we will be marking 50 years to the Israeli victory in the 1967 Six-Day War, a victory which has strengthened Israel considerably, but has left us 50 years with an open question. What do we do with our Palestinian neighbors? That when I've opened the annals or the records of the Israeli cabinet in 1967, Prime Minister Eshkol is asking his cabinet members not how do we annex, but what do we do with 2 million Arabs? That's how he's asked that question. And the only answer, after considering all of the elements, is we separate and we pursue the idea of a two-state solution whereby the Palestinians will have their own state, living side by side with Israel in peace, and of course based on clear understanding of Israel's security concerns. In 1947, the UN General Assembly has adopted a resolution calling for two nations, two states, a Jewish state and an Arab state. This is about time, after 50 years, that we pursue this option aggressively, despite all the impediments, despite all the setbacks, despite terror and all, in order to pursue this, in order to preserve Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people. Israel is faced with two major strategic threats. One from the outside, Iran, a vile enemy which destabilizes the region, supports our worst enemies, fighting the Sunni moderate nations who want to go with us on a regional opportunity. And on the other hand, the other threat from inside is the option, which has been raised recently in the White House, of the possibility of a one-state solution. The idea that there will be an Arab-Jewish state rather than preserving the vision of Zionism, which is the homeland of the Jewish people. This is the real risk we are facing. We should object vehemently to any option of a one-state solution. We should object to a Jewish Arab state. We should preserve the option of the nation state of the Jewish people, Israel, side by side with a Palestinian state, and it can be done despite all odds. For this, we need you. For this, I call upon you. For this, I tell you, don't give up. All moderate forces in Israel and in the United States, especially in the Jewish community, should work proactively to pursue the option of the two-state solution, thus preserving the well-being and security of the State of Israel forever. Thank you very much. Shalom to you, and good luck in your deliberations.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the chair of the J Street National Finance Committee, Diana Shaw Clark.
Good morning. My name is Diana Shaw Clark. I'm a member of J Street's National Board and chairman of the National Finance Committee. And first I wanted to thank Leader of the Opposition, Bougie Herzog, for those wonderful, inspiring remarks beginning. More than a year ago, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action was successfully implemented. It marked one of the greatest diplomatic achievements in a generation, successfully blocking Iran from developing a nuclear weapon through diplomatic, not military means. We owe it largely to the leadership of legislators like Senator Chris Murphy, who I'm privileged to introduce today. Senator Murphy had been active in Connecticut politics for decades before his election to the United States Senate in 2012. The election brought him to national attention and to a seat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. In the few years since, he's taken a lead in promoting a diplomacy-first approach to managing our conflicts abroad. As the ranking member on the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Subcommittee on the Near East, South Asia, Central Asia, and Counterterrorism, Senator Murphy was one of the Senate's most eloquent and informed advocates for the Iran agreement. During his robust and spirited floor speech touting the merits of the agreement, Senator Murphy invoked Israel's negotiations with the Palestinians. He quoted Yitzhak Rabin's enduring assertion, "Peace is never easy, but history almost always judges that it's worthwhile." A year on, with Iran's nuclear program successfully defanged and an unprecedented inspections regime in place, Rabin's words prove entirely apt. Senator Murphy's ardent, informed, and persuasive support for human rights and his preference for diplomacy over belligerence has won him growing favor and a national constituency. It is my hope, and one I hope that all of J Street shares, is that Senator Murphy's approach to foreign policy, one that is both highly principled and pragmatic, will shape the future of American leadership in the world. With that, again, it is my privilege to introduce to you Senator Chris Murphy.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Diana. Thank you for that kind introduction. You're really in for a treat today. I was backstage with some of your panelists who are up next. They're going to do a fantastic job, and so my effort largely here is to get out of the way so that you can hear from some real talent. I want to thank you to send a thanks to Jeremy and to Dylan and to everyone at J Street for being such friends of mine during my coming of age on American foreign policy and our role in the world, and for inviting me here. J Street is an important ally for those of us in the United States Senate who consider ourselves friends of Israel and friends of the U.S.-Israel relationship. You are a critical partner for those of us who still believe in the transformative power of diplomacy. You are a vital contributor to the debate over the future of the Middle East, and I'm really here just to applaud you for all of the work that you have done and continue to do, and really the remarkable growth that you have seen over a very short period of time. You know, these days, a lot of us in the Senate are talking a lot about Supreme Court politics, and I've been thinking, you know, both in the context of that debate and in preparation for today, about maybe my most favorite jurists. As a young law school student, I loved reading Oliver Wendell Holmes, and I thought about him as I was thinking about what to say here this morning. During Justice Holmes' senior year in college, he voluntarily enlisted in the Massachusetts militia in order to join the Union Army during the Civil War. And frankly, few soldiers saw more action than Holmes did. He fought in the Wilderness Campaign, he was at Chancellorsville, he was at Antietam. He nearly died, and he saw hundreds of his friends and fellow soldiers fall to vicious injuries. He returned to Boston scarred deeply by what he saw. And his experience in the Civil War, it deeply affected his view of the law as a professor and then later as a jurist. In an era where the Revolutionary era natural law theory still abounded, Holmes said this. He said, quote, "Men make their own laws. These laws do not flow from some mysterious omnipresence in the sky." With his own eyes, he had seen the horror of the Civil War, where each side would not capitulate because they believed in the natural basis for their cause. Holmes founded a new legal school of what's called legal realism, the understanding that law was based in power and in politics. And I think about Holmes a lot when I'm told that all policy that flows from the bosom of a just cause must be in and of itself just as well. I think about homes when I'm told that if one thing is black or white, then everything else that flows from it must also be black or white. America's support for Israel is absolute. It is a black and white issue. My belief in the righteousness of a permanent Jewish state in the Middle East, it's unbreakable, and I'd suspect that if you're in this hall today, you believe the same. But the man who will likely be the next ambassador to Israel called my work on behalf of Israel anti-Semitic, simply because I don't agree with his particular position on the future of Israel. And I wasn't alone in being on the receiving end of this scorn. He called the president's actions anti-Semitic as well, and I don't have to tell you what he called all of you. Now, Mr. Friedman gave a remarkable performance before the Foreign Relations Committee, upon which I sit. He effectively recanted almost every strong statement that he has made, castigating those of us who support Israel, without perfectly parroting the positions and statements of the current Israeli government. And though it seems more than a little bit coincidental that this epiphany about the hurtfulness of his words happened to occur at the exact moment of his confirmation, I hope he's telling the truth. I truly hope that he regrets these words. Because while our nation's support for Israel cannot be questioned, we do have to ask some questions about what it means to say that you support Israel. In his legal writings, Holmes begged us to consider all opinions, not to be so close-minded as to shudder debate, refusing to see all sides. He knew that the Civil War was a just cause, but the inability to see the other side's perspective doomed the war to last too long, taking countless unnecessary lives. J Street demands the space to expand the scope of what it means to be pro-Israel, to be passionately, vigorously pro-Israel, to understand that if you're for Israel, you don't have to be blind to the cause of the Palestinians, to understand that if you are for Israel, you don't have to reject the genius of diplomacy. I don't support settlement construction inside the generally accepted boundaries. I don't support settlement construction inside the generally accepted boundaries of a future Palestinian state because I support Israel, right? A two-state future is essential for Israel's long-term survival. As Ehud Barak explained, if you put in one room all the living former heads of Mossad, the Shin Bet, and the Israel Defense Forces, more than 90% of them would say that it's simpler to protect Israel from a border that assures our security interests next to a Palestinian state than to protect a greater Israel with millions of Palestinians living under its control. Putting up more and more settlements makes a future viable, sustainable Palestinian state less likely. Now, I was one of the first senators to announce my support for the Iran nuclear agreement because I support Israel. A nuclear Iran would be a disaster for Israel. And in the first year of this agreement, there is no doubt that it is working and that Israel is safer because of it. More than 2/3 of Iran's centrifuges have been removed. 98% of the enriched uranium has been shipped out of the country. The Iraq reactor has been removed and the core filled with cement. The most intrusive inspections regime ever negotiated, giving the IAEA all the necessary access to Iran, is happening now. Iran is complying with the deal. I thought it was a horrible, dangerous idea for Prime Minister Netanyahu to speak against the agreement in Congress because I support Israel. His visit to Congress in order to try to influence a domestic political debate only served to heighten the growing politicization of this issue, the issue of Israel in Congress. It made it look falsely like Republicans stood with Israel and Democrats didn't. His speech didn't affect the outcome of the debate. It just served to help Republicans who wanted to turn support for Israel into an election year wedge issue. And finally, I oppose President Trump's Muslim ban because I support Israel. Last week, I stood at the New Haven area Jewish Community Center talking about the fear that is sweeping across communities in Connecticut and across the nation because of this vicious increase in hate speech against Jews. But how can we effectively push back against this hate speech when our government is proposing to pass hateful discriminatory policies against another religious group? We need to urgently come together to oppose the anti-Semitism that has come roaring back into public view. Just this past weekend, a dozen more swastikas and racial slurs were drawn on cars and buildings in Buffalo, New York. We need to come together, Republicans and Democrats, liberals and conservatives, to condemn it, to stop it now, and our government needs to be morally consistent in condemning discrimination and violence against all religious groups. And so I'm thrilled to be here with you today, to be, as a member of the Foreign Relations Committee, at the center of what is a very perilous moment for the world. As the fires of the Middle East continue to burn, I'm watching the influence of the United States shrink in real time as the Trump administration, frankly, fumbles its way through its initial forays into international relations. The only thing that's consistent about this administration's foreign policy so far is that every day it changes. That's bad news for Israel, frankly, and our other allies across the world who rely on the consistency of American influence. But what's also bad for Israel is a debate in the United States where some people try to say that there is only one set of policies that is considered to be pro-Israel. As has always been the case, there has to be room for debate within the pro-Israel community about what U.S. policy best serves the long-term security interests of a Jewish state in the Middle East. And that's what J Street stands for, creating that room for debate and making sure that there is a place in that debate for progressive pro-Israel voices. Now, I know that this seems like a more difficult endeavor today than it has been in the past, and it is, frankly. Your work is going to be more difficult over the next 4 years than it has been before, but you're here because you know this. It is also going to be more important that you invest in this debate over the next 4 years than it ever has been before. And so I'm just going to leave you with some closing words from Justice Holmes. If you ever have a chance, read a brilliant speech he gave, I think in 1884, during Memorial Day. And after speaking about all of the factors that are outside of one's control when trying to take on a just but difficult cause, he reminded his audience that, quote, "the one and only success which it is his to command is to bring to his work a mighty, mighty heart." Having worked with J Street since its beginnings, having seen your power, your influence, your command here grow, knowing the urgency of the cause to which you all subscribe, I know that when it comes to a mighty heart, J Street has this in spades. And I'm so pleased to be an ally of yours in this fight. Thank you very much for having me here this morning.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our moderator and panel, New York Times columnist Thomas Friedman, Ambassador Martin Indyk, Dr. Robert Malley, and Michelle Flournoy.
Good morning. It's great to be here at the Conference of Presidents of major non-right-wing Jewish organizations. Yeah. The actual heart and soul of the American Jewish community. My name is Thomas Friedman. As we say in the New York Times, no relation to David Friedman, okay? We have a great panel this morning. Rob Malley, former senior advisor to President Obama on the Middle East, Michelle Flournoy, former Undersecretary of Defense, and Martin Indyk, former everything important on the Middle East, okay, for several administrations. I want to begin by posing a question to all of you. What strikes me about this moment, as someone who's like the three of you followed this region and this conflict most of my adult life, is I haven't been here before. Haven't been to a time and place where Israel was more free to be whatever it wanted to be. I can't imagine a time when the countries surrounding it were weaker, when Europe was more distracted, and when we had an administration in Washington that either didn't care or wouldn't care about whatever Israel does. Martin, start with you and we'll go down the panel. What do you think this means? What do you expect to come out of this really unique situation for the Israeli government right now?
Not much.
Thank you. Michelle.
First of all, I just want to say hi, everybody. It's great to see you here in such large numbers. I've had the honor of addressing J Street conferences, I think almost from your inception, and it's great to see how much you've grown over the last few years, so congratulations. I could add a few other points to your lead-in to the question. I mean, in terms of the strength of Israel's economy, the strength of its military, the strength of its relationships with major powers, China, India, Europe, even though those are often under strain, but they're well established, and of course with the United States. Israel has never been stronger and more capable of taking risks for peace. And given the imperative of resolving its conflict with the Palestinians for the sake of its own future, as Senator Coons outlined so clearly, Murphy outlined so clearly, what better time when you have the President of the United States basically saying, whatever you decide, I'll support. And certainly Congress will too. So, you know, if not now, when? But unfortunately, and I say this with great regret as somebody who strongly identifies as a Zionist and somebody who cares deeply about the fate of the Jewish state and the Jewish people, something has gone very wrong. And there is a deep settler state operating in Israel today that will make sure that peace with the Palestinians, if it involves giving up any kind of territory in the West Bank, simply will not happen. And instead, they see the opportunity to take advantage of this rise of populism and greater nationalism in the United States and around the world to advance their narrow nationalist agenda of annexation of the West Bank. And we know where that leads. Blind Freddie can tell you that that will lead to a binational state, not a Jewish state. And yet they are determined to press on. They have the Prime Minister of Israel by the throat, politically, and there is a great danger that in this permissive environment, they will achieve their objectives. And so I think that really underscores the need to do everything we can to, first of all, see clearly what the agenda is here and call them on it and every step of the way.
Martin, let me just do a quick follow-up before I ask Michelle, and that is, because of your experience, what does it mean to have an American ambassador to Israel who will be to the right of the Israeli Prime Minister?
Look, one shouldn't exaggerate the influence of the ambassador. He's going to be in Jerusalem, he's not going to be in Washington. He's not going to be in the White House. He has his channel, of course, but you know, his ability to actually influence policy when his job is to implement policy shouldn't be exaggerated. So I think you know, if we fixate on Ambassador-designate Friedman instead of focusing on the policy as it's constructed in the White House, we're looking at the wrong place. What's important in that regard is that notwithstanding Ambassador-designate Friedman's boasting about how he's going to move the embassy to Jerusalem, it didn't happen. And that just underscores the point. Why didn't it happen is an interesting issue in itself, but we don't need to get into it. But the point is that he clearly wanted to move the embassy. He clearly expected the embassy was going to be moved, and it didn't happen. And I predict boldly, since very few of my predictions have ever come true, I predict that Donald Trump will not move the embassy to Jerusalem short of an agreement between Israelis and Palestinians.
And just between us, is that because the Prime Minister of Israel is telling him not to?
No, the Prime Minister of Israel would not dare to tell him not to for fear of the political consequences at home were that to be leaked. So Bibi has to say, of course we want the embassy, great idea. No, it's because it seems that the theory of the case that Jared Kushner has is that there's a way to achieve regional peace, to bring the Sunni Arabs into the tent of peace, and that will somehow facilitate and lubricate the deal. And once he started down that road, he heard from the Sunni Arabs, don't embarrass us. You want us to play, don't create problems for us. And if that is in fact the reason, I have reason to believe it is, why they delayed, they will continue to delay, because that reason is not going to go away.
Michelle, you served in a senior Pentagon position. You saw this from the security side. Give us your take on what do you think is going to evolve out of this very unique moment when Israel is home alone more than it's ever been in terms of its diplomatic options?
You know, when I was in the Pentagon, I did spend a lot of time on the question of how do we bolster Israel's security, working in particular on qualitative military edge issues and so forth. And I must say I am more worried now about Israel's long-term security than ever. I agree with Martin that the IDF is stronger today than it's ever been, and the U.S. commitment to Israel's security is as rock solid as ever. But what disturbs me is that this administration has so sort of cavalierly walked away from a U.S. commitment to supporting a two-state solution that every administration, Republican and Democrat, has held on to and has advocated for decades. And the reason for that is, as was referred to by the senator, the only way that we can ultimately secure peace for an Israeli state that is both democratic and Jewish is with a two-state solution. And this administration seems to have sort of said, well, we don't really care, whatever they decide, without really delving into the details of could a one-state solution ever be secure? And as was mentioned, every security professional on the Israeli side, or almost every, 90% plus, say the answer is no. We as a think tank at CNAS have done a lot of work on the question of could you secure a two-state solution? Bringing American and Israeli military officers together to design what that would look like. And I'll tell you, the only thing that can secure Israel long-term is a two-state solution. So the fact that that is somehow now in question, I find that more disturbing than anything I've seen in all of my years working on Israel security issues.
Michelle, I was going to bring up your work at the think tank. Give us the highlights of that security plan, if you could. What is it about? Why should we understand that there is a way for Israel to have a secure separation agreement with the Palestinians?
So we undertook this study because we understood that the paramount issue for Israelis is the question of security. And we wanted to demonstrate that that question could be satisfactorily answered. And what it involves is a multi-layered security system where, first and foremost, we give the Israeli state the capacity to defend itself by itself to every extent possible. We also do serious capacity building work with a new Palestinian state. But very important is the role of the neighbors. So what role for Jordan, securing the Jordan Valley? What role for Egypt in helping to secure the Sinai? What role for the United States and the international community as guarantors of the arrangement? So it's a very detailed report. And again, it wasn't just a bunch of Americans. We had former IDF and intelligence officials from Israel being part of the design team. The report is now published. You can find it on the CNAS website. But we are also using this to have a series of conversations, not only here, but in Israel, with the Jordanians, with the Egyptians, and with others to try to build consensus around this approach.
Thank you. Rob, when the Trump transition team sat down with you all and said, what can we learn from what you learned in the previous 8 years, what did you say to them?
What makes you think that conversation took place?
Oh, you mean it? You mean
what
it
transition
didn't?
team?
Pick up this question.
But I want to start first because it's my first time speaking to J Street since I joined the administration. And I really want to thank all of you. Thank J Street, thank Jeremy. Real shout out when we were fighting for the JCPOA, which Senator Murphy just spoke about. We knew we had all of you, behind that effort. We knew we couldn't do it without you. And it's a deal, I think, as we just heard, that did, in our view, tremendous good for the United States and for Israel. Prevented Iran from acquiring a nuclear bomb, avoided a war, opened the door to multilateral diplomacy, and to the critique that this was done and gave Iran $100 billion. First of all, it's at most $50 billion, and second of all, it's their money. So it's a deal whereby Iran is using its own money to prevent itself from having a nuclear bomb. If Trump is really the art of the deal man, he should appreciate that outcome. But again, thank all of you for everything you've done over the last several years. So I don't know how to answer your question, because the truth is there really wasn't much of a transition, passing of the baton on the Middle East. So I can't really answer that. I could answer though.
Talk about this moment though. What do you expect, and what from an Israeli government now that really is more free than ever? Will they miss Obama? Will Bibi miss Obama? Because Bibi used Obama a lot to say to his cabinet at times, I suspect, I would do this except Obama won't let me.
So I'm going to take a slightly heretical view on this. I don't mind what President Trump said for the following reason. Let me ask you a question. If he had said, I believe in a two-state solution, how many people in this room think he actually would have achieved it? Okay, I don't see too many hands getting up. So what he said, Martin and I and many others tried under the Clinton administration, didn't succeed. Tried, and then President Bush tried to achieve a two-state solution, didn't succeed. President Obama and Secretary Kerry were as committed as anyone I ever have known to try to reach a two-state solution. They didn't succeed either. So I think it's time for the Palestinians and mainly for Israel to ask itself some honest questions, as Martin said, about where they want to go, what direction they want to head in, and not look to the U.S. Either side look to the U.S. either for salvation or for protection or for cover. So the fact that that cover is removed, there's some benefit to it. There's an honest conversation that now has to take place. Israelis have to ask themselves that question without either the illusion of a peace process, which didn't produce peace, or the notion of American restraint, which didn't really restrain all that much, and ask themselves, what future do we want? How are we going to secure our future as a Jewish democratic state? And if it's not a two-state solution, what is it?
Is it too late for that conversation, Rob? Is it just too late?
I'm not sure what that means.
I mean that even if they had
exactly the right
if they had that conversation, are the settlers, as Martin referred to, just too strong that basically nothing can happen?
If I were to reach that conclusion, I'd be doing something very different these days. So maybe it's just for self-preservation. I'm not prepared to say that what has been built through political decisions can't be unbuilt through political decisions. Mm-hmm. These are decisions. It's not an act of nature. It's going to be difficult, and the politics are going to be wrenching for any Israeli prime minister. But I don't know what the mathematical formula is that tells us the two-state solution is dead and buried. Again, it's a matter of political will, it's a matter of political energy, it's a matter of political courage on all sides, Israeli, Palestinian, and ultimately the US and the rest of the world. But I'm not a prophet who knows that when we've reached that tipping point.
Martin,
I think it's dead.
Well, let's talk about that. I was going to ask you about the weather, but if you think it's dead, climate change. Why do you say that?
Well, first of all, it's important to understand in the Holy Land there's a difference between being dead and being dead and buried.
Yes. Go ahead.
So, to declare it dead doesn't mean it doesn't get resurrected. I do imagine there are circumstances under which it can get resurrected. I think we all, at this point, understand a number of realities. The first is the one I already described, but the second is that doesn't produce a solution. The alternative to two-state solutions, or what they call one-state solutions, are not solutions. They're just recipes for continued conflict. Mm-hmm. It may be quiet now, but it won't be quiet forever. It's impossible to imagine that peace between Israel and the Palestinians will be achieved through anything other than a two-state solution. But for the time being, there is no way in which I can see that the two-state solution can be achieved. Certainly not with the current configuration of the Israeli government, which is the most right-wing in history and most opposed to a two-state solution, such that the Prime Minister isn't even allowed to say the words when he comes to Washington. But also on the Palestinian side, let's be honest. It's a divided polity with a weak leadership. Abu Mazen doesn't feel he has the mandate to make compromises on Palestinian rights that makes it impossible to move on his side. And the notion that somehow the Sunni Arabs, because of a real common interest that they have with Israel in combating the hegemonic ambitions of the Iranians, somehow leads to them being willing to, in effect, compromise Palestinian rights and take the risk of being accused of doing that by the Palestinian leadership, which they will be accused of. There's no Saudi or even Egyptian leader that's going to take that kind of risk. So given all of those realities, with all the will in the world, Jared Kushner, Donald Trump are not going to be able to achieve a two-state solution. And as I said, a one-state solution isn't achievable either. So what are we left with? The people who are pushing for a one-state solution, pushing against a two-state solution, are the people that have the bit in their teeth now, particularly on the Israeli side, but Hamas as well is also advocating for one-state solution, and they're pushing it politically, gaining strength in the West Bank, it's consolidating their control in Gaza. So it's like the era of the triumphalist one-state solutioners now. And that's where J Street and everybody else who cares about the future of Israel and the Palestinians needs to redouble your efforts, our efforts, because in these circumstances, if the one-staters are the only ones who are out there pushing, they will drive off the two-state solution for a long time, and eventually it will explode. It is not, in the short term, it looks sustainable. And so we have to watch out for that line that we always use. It's not sustainable. It is sustainable. But in the long term, it's not sustainable. And it will explode. And it will have, I fear for the consequences for Israel. So we must never give up on the effort to maintain belief in the two-state solution, even though today it doesn't look possible.
If Jared Kushner were here, the president's son-in-law, and seemingly designated the next Martin Indyk of this administration, what would you tell him?
Don't start from here. No, I would tell him, first of all, and read Tom Friedman's book From Beirut.
Thank you.
By the way, I'm not just telling you that only to flatter you, because that's what I tell everybody who's new to the Middle East.
Because just to add one thing to the question, because he does seem to think they rediscovered the wheel, the idea that we'll have the Arab states come in. You know, I mean, those of us who know something about the Saudi peace plan, you know, I mean.
Well, you were pretty excited about
that. Yeah, I was 20 years ago.
Yeah, but why do I say read Tom Friedman's From Beirut to Jerusalem? Because you unpacked for the naive American solutionist who comes into the Middle East bazaar believing that in the good old American way, every problem has a solution. And so therefore, we'll just try a little bit different, outside in,
that's right.
Bottom up,
yeah.
You know, and somehow, because we have the will to do it, we'll find the solution that nobody else was able to find. And what you explain in the book is that they're all just waiting for you out there, Israelis and Arab leaders alike.
Have we got a carpet for you?
Exactly. And they're all very expert at selling shoddy merchandise and dreams of peace and Nobel Prizes to naive Americans at twice the price and no peace in the end. And I say that as a naive American who went through the experience. That's why I wrote my book called I called it Innocent Abroad, because that's what we are. And we keep on doing it every time, every administration, because that's who we are. That's the great beauty of us as Americans. We somehow believe it can be done. So that's the first thing. Don't be naive. Don't be fooled by those who whisper ideas into your ear about how we can do it this way or we can do it that way. They're just designing a rabbit hole for you to go down. And that's true of all of them. It's equal opportunity here. They're all great at it. So secondly, do something which I think I actually give them credit for this, is to take your time to listen to everybody. They need to be talking more to the Palestinians. Jared Kushner, I don't think, has any exposure to the Palestinians. He needs to. His assistant in this was Jason Greenblatt, who's clearly going to have a role there. So I think that listening, taking their time to listen, to get a sense of what actually can be done realistically before they decide what to do is really important. Thirdly, they've got to get the structure right. They've got it all bollocksed up at the moment. This can't be done without the State Department. Pure and simple. Cannot be done out of the White House. And
why not?
Well, first of all, Jared Kushner's got a hell of a lot of other things to do, so he can't be the envoy. It'd be a terrible mistake if he was the envoy. It'd just be his father-in-law setting him up for failure. So I'd strongly recommend he not be the envoy. If he gives it to Donald Trump's real estate lawyer, Mr. Greenblatt, maybe that's the right thing to do. But he needs to be in the State Department.
Interesting.
The idea, and Michelle and Rob can speak to this, that the White House is conducting its own diplomacy will lead to bad results in the end. And because this problem is so complicated, and especially if you're going to try to bring the Arab states into it, involves such a time suck in terms of engagement and necessary engagement with them, that the structure of it to sustain it and engagement is going to be very important. Then you have to see what can happen. I do think, and this is something Michelle and I have worked on with a group of other foreign policy experts, both Republican and Democratic. We just brought out a report on Friday. But in the Middle East, what we said, we developed this bipartisan strategy for the Trump administration. What we said is you need to spend some time rebuilding the relationships with the key Sunni Arab states and working with Israel and them to deal with Iran in a sophisticated way. And out of that may come a better understanding of the way in which they can then help with the Israeli-Palestinian dimension of the policy. But I think first things first. Rebuild your relationships, establish an understanding of what is possible, and then see what can be done.
You know, you remind me from Beirut to Jerusalem, Martin, the central story there was when I was living in Beirut with my wife in the early 1980s, we used to walk by a carpet store off Hammer Street every day. And they had this beautiful blue Persian carpet in the window. And we admired it every day. And one day we said, let's just go in and see what it costs. So we go in, and the owner takes it out of the window. He lays it down on the floor, and he takes a high-intensity lamp and puts it on top of it so we can examine the threads. And it was just beautiful. And we then said, would you flip it over, and so we can see the threads on the back? And he did. And the second he did that, there was a power surge, which often happened in Beirut, and the high-intensity lamp exploded. And burning shards came down on the back of the carpet. And without missing a beat, he said, you know, sometimes they're worth more this way. Okay? So, I never forget that. That's the story I would tell Jared Kushner. Michelle, Martin really set you up, I think, for what for me is a really important question, and that is the Iran question. You know, so far there's been a lot of talk out of the administration, but no action about either getting rid of the Iran deal or adopting a more aggressive posture toward Iran. What do you expect to happen out of them, knowing the characters? And now we talk about McMaster and Madison Tillerson. And what do you think should happen vis-a-vis America and Iran that would actually enhance the possibility, as Martin alluded to actually advancing the Israeli-Palestinian peace process?
Sure. So I think the good news is that the JPOA did at least take the nuclear question off the front burner with Iran. The program is halted, if not rolled back, in some very important respects that that were described before, at least for a decade or more. So what the focus is now is really on Iran's other destabilizing activities in the region. Its support for proxies, its use of the IRGC Quds Force to try to undermine regimes, to stoke civil wars and gain position, whether it's in Syria or Iraq or Yemen, and to gain power and influence in the region. And you know, I think that concern is real. I think this administration right now is speaking loudly and carrying a small stick, when we all know the right answer is speak softly and carrying a big stick. But if they wanted to, you know, push back on Iran harder, I think it would be the right course of action would be in quiet intelligence and special operations, interdiction kind of activities between the United States and Israel, the United States and other Gulf partners, and so forth. Our experience has been with Iran that when we actually put up some resistance to their behavior, not with a lot of public threats, but they sort of hit a US wall, they often back off. So we need to do that, but we need to do it in a way that does not create so much tension and so much overt, doesn't create a crisis that then undermines the very important progress we've made on the nuclear side. So it has to be delicate. I think there are people inside the administration, like Secretary Mattis, who understand that, like H.R. McMaster. The question is, will they be listened to? Who's going to drive this train at a time when you really don't have an interagency process? You don't have a National Security Council process that is leveraging the talent and experience that you may have in your cabinet and in the departments to actually inform the decisions that are being made by the president.
Rob, can there be a successful and sustainable Israeli-Palestinian peace process without a successful and sustainable Sunni-Shiite peace process?
I think obviously one makes the other much more complicated, and if I could say a little bit more about Iran, three points. First, Martin made the point about how we need to repair relations with the region, and I'm not going to deny that the Obama administration had some rough relationships, but this was not a matter of only maybe bad management. In some cases, I would say it's mutual. There were real substantive differences. There's a difference on the peace process with Israel. There was a difference with Israel on Iran and with our Gulf Arab neighbors on Iran. They were not in favor of the JCPOA. There were differences on the wisdom of elections and allowing the Muslim Brotherhood to govern and the role of democracy. So there are real differences. It's not going to be easy unless, and maybe the Trump administration will put all those to the side, but it wasn't easy to keep those relationships in the state that one would have liked them to be, given these substantive differences, which are very real. And I think part of the Obama administration's approach was to try to clarify these relationships by making clear the U.S. stands for deal with Iran. It stands for democracy in the region. It stands for a two-state solution. It doesn't want to intervene in Syria. And if that's going to create problems with our allies, we're going to have to manage those problems and not sacrifice the views that the administration had. That's point number one. Point number two on Iran, and I think Michelle just alluded to it, it's going to be very hard to crank up, and I don't always understand what people mean when they say push back against Iran. So tell me concretely, what does that mean in Iraq? What does that mean in Syria? What does that mean in Yemen? How are we going to push back? Does it mean military? Does it mean other steps? Does it mean reinstating some of the sanctions that had been lifted under the JCPOA? In which case, at some point, the Iranians may say, what's in it for us? We did this for these sanctions to be lifted. Now you're imposing them on the grounds because of our regional activities. So I think you could very quickly come to a point where the deal unravels. My third point is I think in terms of Iran, the Trump administration is going to face what I call it's the Trump team's trilemma. There are three objectives that President Trump, during the campaign and then when he was elected, said that he wants for the Middle East. Crush ISIS, crush Iran, but America first, meaning keep our presence in the region to modest levels. My view is you could have two of those three, any two of those three if you want. I have my preference about which two I would choose. You can't have all three of them. You can't simultaneously say that the priority is to defeat ISIS, keep our presence on the ground modest, but at the same time say you're going to go after Iran. And Iran has, as Michelle knows well from experience, has many ways of retaliating against our presence in Iraq, against our presence in Syria, which will make the fight against ISIS impossible unless we increase our troop presence to the point where we could wage a two-front war against ISIS and Iran. So that's a real conundrum, and I think that's where the Iran question is going to loom largest, both in terms of whether the Trump administration wants to preserve the deal, and that means being careful about how far you push and how confrontational you are. And also this, what I call this trilemma. You just can't have, it's not a menu where you could eat everything you want. You're going to have to choose two of the three. The Obama administration chose two. At this point, it's not clear to me which two the Trump administration is going to pick.
So the Obama administration chose crush ISIS, keep a modest American presence there, and in effect kind of a standstill with Iran.
Well, I mean, with Iran, the gamble was, I would argue that it was pretty well achieved, not entirely, was through the JCPOA, through continued sanctions, through multilateral diplomacy, through some form of engagement, you could keep them in a place where it's manageable. It wasn't the solution. I mean, the JCPOA didn't address the concerns that we have about Iran, or frankly, some of the concerns Iran has about its own security situation. That was not part of the deal, and if it had been part of the deal, it would still be negotiated today. So it was a cabin deal, a compartmentalized deal. I'd argue that everything else would be far worse if Iran were rushing towards a nuclear bomb. But that was the deal, because the rest was simply not, it wasn't that people didn't think, oh, it would be great if Iran wouldn't continue its ballistic missile program or its support for Hezbollah or its other regional activities. It's just if you added that to the mix, then the negotiations would go on a decade or more.
What do you say to our Sunni Arab allies when they say, you guys have not taken the Iran threat seriously? Iran is now the influencing power in 4 Arab capitals, Beirut, Damascus, Baghdad, and Sana'a.
So, I mean, first of all, it's not as if this happened all of a sudden. I mean, they were, as you know, they had a preponderant influence in Beirut, in Damascus, in Baghdad. Sana'a is new, but I think Yemen is a kind of a different case, and good luck to anyone who wants to govern there. But so, listen, I don't want to belittle their concern. I think the United States, has to make a difference between understanding that concern and buying into the notion of sectarian war, or a war between Arabs and Persians, or dismantling the deal. Yes. And there's a line there, and I'm not sure that the purpose of a lot of our allies was simply to keep Iran in a box. Some of them have far more aggressive agendas, and that's why I think the Obama administration began. It didn't complete it, and again, I'm the first to admit where we fell short. There needs to be a clarification in our dealings with Israel and with the Sunni Arab states. What exactly do we see as the future of Iran? It's not going to go away. We're not going to be able to sort of defeat it militarily, because it has proved, partly it knows the Middle East better than we do. And just an anecdote, when I met a Lebanese, this was before, just when the uprising had begun in Syria. It was a Lebanese who was close to Iran, and I was talking to him about, what happens if Assad goes, and he said, Assad's not going to go, don't even think about it. But after I pressed him for some time, he said, okay, let's assume you Americans get what you want. Assad is gone, things are going better. Who's better at dealing with chaos, you or us? Look at Afghanistan, look at Iraq, look at Syria, look at Lebanon. We just do it better than you. So fine, you can go ahead and get your immediate political objective, but ultimately we, Hezbollah, the Iranians, we're going to be better at understanding and at manipulating and at dealing with chaos and uncertainty and the confusion. So I think we have to be clear about what role is Iran going to play in the region, and until we have that sort of meeting of the minds between us and our allies, we're going to be a bit, and again, I'm talking more about the Obama administration now than the Trump administration, there's going to be a gap, because what they want, what Israel wants, is not the same as what some of us here in the Obama administration wanted.
Well, Martin, let's pick up on that. I'll enlarge the question or repeat it in a different way, which is, can we have an Israeli-Palestinian peace process without an Iran-U.S. peace process? Without the Iran-U.S. Cold War has distorted, it seems to me, the Middle East and our policy there as much as, I won't say more than anything, but certainly as much as anything else. Wouldn't the interesting radical move for Trump be to apply the art of the deal to the Iranians?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, and there is a way that Trump could actually approach this. But let me say, first of all, that understand from the perspective of Tehran, they see us coming, always. They're very smart. They understand the relationship between the Arab-Israeli conflict and their hegemonic ambitions very well. And so if now it's Israel and the Sunni Arabs are going to align against them, and they're going to try to promote Palestinian peace as part of this, they will make sure to start something in the Israeli-Palestinian arena to prevent that from happening. So one of the unintended consequences of all of this talk about regional peace is that the chances for conflict either between Hezbollah and Israel or Hamas and Israel, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which is a kind of wholly owned subsidiary of the Iranians, they will stoke it up in one way or another. We've seen this so many times before.
The minute we proceed down that track.
Right, so always in the Middle East, beware of unintended consequences, as you would be the first.
Yes.
So now, in terms of the art of the deal, so here's the thing, and Rob, I think, put his finger on it. If the Iranians see that Trump, under the influence of Bibi Netanyahu, is going to Congress where there's kind of automatic support now for ratcheting up the sanctions, they've already started down this road, and particularly ratcheting up the financial sanctions, then the Iranians are going to get to the point where they say, hey, that's not the deal that we made. It was sanctions relief for our nuclear program, not our nuclear program plus increased sanctions. So I think that's part of the calculation here, is that by ratcheting up the sanctions, the Iranians will be actually the ones that walk out of the deal, not the United States. And that could lead to very bad consequences, which I don't think that President Trump actually wants. I think he likes to be able to trash the deal, in terms of description, but actually to maintain the deal, because he understands that it buys time. If he, God forbid, should have 8 years, he's still not going to face an Iran with nuclear weapons if the deal holds. So better, I think, it's a long way of answering your question, better for him to start to reach out quietly to the Iranians and say the following. Look, we can up the pressure on you with sanctions. But instead of doing that, let's talk about a deal in which we'll actually remove our bilateral sanctions. That's what we're prepared to put on the table. Now, here are the things that we need from you. First of all, you're going to have to back away from exploiting sectarian tensions in the region. We can talk about the details of that. Secondly, you're going to have to back away from your efforts to subvert Israeli-Palestinian negotiations. And thirdly, and most importantly, we need to talk to you about extending the deal. We want to talk about, the sunset provisions of the deal.
Right.
Right? In other words,
it's very interesting.
To take the things that the critics of the deal say is wrong with the deal.
Fix it.
And fix it by offering not to increase the sanctions, although it's out there, it's hanging out there as a sort of Damocles, but rather to take the sanctions off. And that gets to your point about how maybe, just maybe, with a smart negotiator, you could actually get the Iranians to the point where you want them to be, not through confrontation, but through negotiation.
Very interesting. No, there's a domestic parallel to that. You could actually make the point, Martin, if Trump wanted to be successful. There's sort of a mood out there. This administration reflects it. You saw it in Brexit, of what I call rip it, don't fix it. You know what I mean? Actually, I use a different word for the first part. It starts with an F. But that is kind of the revolutionary mood out there. Obamacare, rip it, don't fix it. Iran deal, rip it, don't fix it. NAFTA, rip it, don't fix it. And that is going to have enormous, if they were to actually pursue all those, will have enormously negative, I think, implications. But the really interesting move would be to actually, on Obamacare, he should have obviously called Schumer and said, look, you send your 3 top negotiators, I'll send mine. We'll send them all to Camp David. Let them come up with a fix of this thing. I'll get more. We'll both get credit. I'll get more, but it'll be okay. He'd be at 70% in the polls right now instead of this. You know, Michelle Martin knows I have 50 rules of Middle East reporting that are in a safe somewhere that one day when I'm long gone I'll publish because they're so politically incorrect. But the first one is that, though, that any U.S. general appointed to operate in the Middle East should have to take a test. And the test is very simple. It's just one question. Do you think the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line? And if you say yes, you can serve in Korea, Okinawa, Japan, Germany, but not in the Middle East. For all the reasons Martin just gave you, that kind of perfect, you know, scratch your left ear with your right hand approach. And so take what Martin's talking about, apply it to Moscow and to Putin. This administration has this bizarre relationship with the Russians, which we do not know the bottom of, and nothing disturbs me more than that. But as you think about Putin right now, Ukraine, Syria, influence on Iran and the Iran deal, how do you look at the U.S.-Russian relationship evolving? And let me add just one codicil here. Does the fact that we have all of these unanswered questions about Trump's relationship with the Russians, questions that go as deep as wondering whether they have compromising material on him, does it actually limit his ability to collaborate with Russia going forward? And what might the implications of that be?
Well, the easy question. I do think that until we have a full, independent investigation that gets to the bottom of Russian interference in our domestic political process and the role of people in the Trump campaign and around the Trump campaign, there will be questions about any agreement that he negotiates on any topic when it comes to the Hill and to the American people for support and potentially ratification. So I think the first step is we have to have a fulsome, independent investigation and let it go where it goes and get to the bottom of this. But when it comes to Russia and the Middle East, I think that Putin has played a relatively limited hand very, very well. He has wanted to reassert Russia as a world power. And one of the ways that he has done that is stepping into what he saw as a possible vacuum in Syria. He's done it without a lot of cost, and he's put himself in a position of being a real power broker in whatever negotiations ultimately occur to try to end the catastrophe that is the Syrian civil war and so forth. I think the thing I worry about is in any sort of Trump-Putin deal is if Trump goes into the negotiations thinking that the objective is to lower tensions, we will get a very bad deal. It would be nice to have a less tense relationship with Russia, don't get me wrong, but we have very clear U.S. objectives in the Middle East, and that's what we have to protect. And oh, by the way, Israel has a real stake in the kind of deal that comes out of the Syrian negotiations. If it ends up with Iranian proxy forces right, in the Golan Heights, that is not a good deal for Israel. I mean, so Israel really has to care about how this comes out. The other thing I would say is that, it's very difficult to separate all these issues, even what you were talking about with Martin. If Trump really does want to make substantially more progress vis-a-vis ISIS, you have to worry about Iran, because right now, Iran is pushing Baghdad to maintain a hard line against the Sunnis inside Iraq. As long as that approach of marginalization continues, we will have a very hard time, even if we're successful in Mosul with the Iraqis, keeping ISIS out, keeping it from coming back again and again and again like a terrible, terrible weed. Same is true in Syria. You cannot solve the ISIS problem unless you get a solution to the broader Syrian problem that doesn't completely marginalize the majority of the population, which are Sunni. So you have, I mean, these things are going to be connected. And again, this is where I worry that, you know, a sort of simplistic approach to a deal that says, let's reduce tensions with Russia, won't actually deliver on the very real security objectives that the United States has in the region.
It's very, very important. Well, I want to get your take on that. Both questions that Michelle raised. One is, does Trump's really odd and unknown relationship with the Russians limit his capacity to do any major deal with them? And then does his, what always struck me as rather naive approach, that we just want to work with the Russians to extirpate ISIS, when Russia's allies are Hezbollah and Iran, when Iran did not go to Syria to extirpate ISIS, but actually to reinforce a genocidal dictator. Is there any sort of US-Russian deal to be had?
So first, I think the answer to your question is paradoxically, at least for the time being, yes, I think it does constrain the administration. I mean, it's notable that after having spoken about how they wanted to work with Russia on Syria, nothing's happened so far as we know. The U.S. has not even sent a high-level delegation to the talks that Russia and Turkey are sponsoring. I think part of it is, and it makes sense, that they just don't want to give more validity to the notion that there's something untoward in their relationship with Russia. So I think that answer is yes. You know, I spent most of the last 2 years dealing with the Russians on Syria. So on the one hand, I'd say the U.S. is not going to be able to resolve Syria. Syria's not going to be able to be resolved if Russia's not part of it. So there's going to have to be a deal at some point. So I make no apologies for that, even though we failed, and many reasons that explain that. The question is what the deal looks like. And the problem right now is that within the four corners of Syria itself, it's hard to see what the U.S. gives Russia that Russia doesn't already more or less have. And so the question is whether you're going to have to expand it to areas that I don't deal with, fortunately for now, Ukraine and others, which is dynamite. But if I'm Putin, what I want from the Americans in terms of getting a deal on Syria is not Syria-related, because I basically have it the way I like. So yes, I want to cooperate more with the U.S. against ISIS. That would sort of rehabilitate the Russians and make them look like they are sort of co-superpowers in the fight against terrorism. But the real payback, I think, is going to be in other theaters, and mainly in the European theater. And I'm not sure that that's something that this administration, particularly because of the concern and the constraint that you raised, is prepared to contemplate for now.
Go ahead, Mark. Please jump in.
Just add one point to this about cooperation with Russia in Syria, is that it's important to understand that Russia, Rob can correct me if I've got this wrong, but my sense is Russia is not fighting against ISIS. It's fighting against the Sunni Arab opposition to Assad, who is their client. And their objective in Syria is to keep Assad in power, not to defeat ISIS. So what exactly are we going to partner with them to do? What they essentially will get out of any kind of partnership is the assurance that Assad is there to stay. And that means that as long as that's the case, there can't be a solution in Syria, because the Sunni Arabs that he's killed so many of and displaced so many millions more will not accept that. On the other hand, what happens in that kind of deal, who's the great beneficiary, is not just Assad, but Iran. Hezbollah. Right? Because Iran and Hezbollah have the Assad regime as their, in effect, pawn and proxy. And Syria is for them the linchpin in that arc that you were describing between Yemen and Iraq and Syria and Lebanon. And so recognizing this, some in the Trump administration have already said, oh, well, the part of the deal will be we will wean Russia from Iran in Syria. And, good luck with that. I don't think that there's any chance that the Russians will turn against the Iranians in Syria, because they know the consequences of that. For Iran, it's a core interest. For everybody else, it's just good to have. But Syria is critical to the Iranians, so they're not about to give it up in this kind of way. So that would either, if the Russians were prepared to go down that road, it would fuel the confrontation. But I believe they're not. And so I think there's a fundamental misconception here. What we need to be doing in Syria is weaning Turkey away from Russia, not Russia away from Iran. Because Turkey, our NATO ally, can and wants to play a more assertive role in Syria, and we need to concert our approach with them, especially in the East, if we're to succeed in defeating ISIS.
Rob, I want to jump back to you for 1 second, because this issue has been out there. Should we declare the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist organization?
No.
Why not?
First of all, the legal foundation doesn't exist. So, I mean, to be a terrorist organization, there has to be proof that you're engaged, that the leadership is engaged in terrorism in a way that, I'm told by all the lawyers who've looked at it, you can't make the case. The Muslim Brotherhood is a vast organization. Some of its branches, networks, are a terrorist organization. I mean, Hamas is a designated organization. Others are not. They have ties to organizations here that do work that has nothing to do with terrorism. So I think part of the reason why, even though it was on the list of the priorities, supposedly of the executive orders that the Trump administration was going to roll out, it hasn't happened, is because some cooler minds have looked at it and said, we can't do it. We don't know where to draw the lines. What do you do with Turkey? I mean, Martin was just talking about Turkey. The AKP is affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood. What do you do in countries like Tunisia, where they're partners in government? What do you do in countries like Jordan or Morocco, where they also have an influential role? So I think that whole notion is, again, part of these misconceptions that have come up and trying to please domestic and foreign constituencies. But hopefully reason will prevail on that. It would be another own goal after the executive order on Muslims and immigration. So
when I listen to you now as we come to a close, and all of these issues and the complexity and irreconcilability of dealing with them, I'm reminded actually of my favorite quote from Beirut to Jerusalem. It was an interview with Robert Strauss, the great Texas lawyer negotiator who was briefly sent out to be the American Middle East negotiator. That's right. He had never been to the West Bank, so he came to Israel, and the Israelis gave him a helicopter tour of the West Bank. And afterwards, he gathered at the King David Hotel with a group of reporters, and they said, "Well, Mr. Strauss, what did you think of the West Bank?" And he said, "Oh, I couldn't tell you." They said, no, what do you think? He said, "Oh, I couldn't tell you." And he said, "No, come on, tell us, what did you think?" He said, "Off the record?" They said, "Yeah, off the record." He said, "I don't know why one of them would want it and why the other wouldn't just give it to him." Okay? And so I think of that when I think of the job of being Secretary of Defense or Secretary of State today or National Security Advisor. And I want to close with each of you talking about this and give each a chance. Is this not the worst time to be responsible for American foreign policy? That if somebody comes to you and says, "Martin, Michelle, Rob, I'd like you to be Secretary of State," wouldn't you really want to say, "I had my heart set on agriculture"? That the Cold War was all about managing power. The post-Cold War was all about American power. And the post-Cold War is all about managing weakness, ours, our allies, and weak collapsing states, and that is hell on wheels. Martin.
I'm going to let
Michelle.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's about managing the chaos that is all around us in the world. And I think what I would say is, I don't think, given our historical role, architecting the post-World War II order that has provided the basis for stability, economic growth, incredible peace and prosperity in a number of regions of the world, given the pressures on that order, the fraying of the order, this is what the report that Martin and I participated in is all about. America has to lead. We don't get the choice to step back and say, we don't have an interest in whether the order survives, whether it's adapted to deal with new realities. To do that is to throw away not only an historical legacy, but any hope that we're going to get a better future that's more conducive to both our interests, our values, and our ability to continue to be a force for good in the world.
Look, I wanted Michelle to lead on this because she says it so much better than me. But there is an international order out there that is now being threatened. It was already being challenged before Donald Trump came along. But Donald Trump has around him people who consider that this is a tear down, not a renovation job. Right. To take your F words and rework them into civilized language. So that is the challenge here. Yes, it's difficult. It's always difficult. But the United States has huge ability to lead the world. There's still a great deal of desire for American leadership. When the President of the United States says we're going to put America first, he sends a signal to everybody else, let's put our own interests first. Everybody else, particularly the larger powers like China and Russia who want to do that anyway. The rest of the world looks to the United States not just to put its own interests first, but to put the interests of this international order, freedom, rule of law, and protection of smaller states against the stronger ones, and promotion of all of the
slow down, I'm writing my next column.
Global and multilateral agreements and institutions, particularly in climate change, but in so many other ways in which over the last 70 years, the United States has constructed a world order that serves not only American interests, it definitely does that, but serves the interests of the vast majority of humanity. And if we give that up, if we give that up now for some sense of narrow, selfish purpose, we will, in the end, reap the whirlwind. We will pay the price in terms of our interests in the world. And so, you know, not only is it really important that you push back on the deep settler state in Israel and preserve the idea of a two-state solution and the future of a Jewish democratic Israel, but it's really important because who but the Jews amongst all of them have such an interest in a liberal international order. We need to push back on that as well.
Rob, you're batting cleanup. You got a free one.
So I see time's up. I'm going to be very, very quick and try to turn your question around. Basically, your question is this the worst time to be the U.S. given what's happening in the world? Maybe the right question is this the worst time to be the world given what's happening in the U.S.?
Oh, wow. Well done. Let's thank this great panel. Thank you. That was great.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome co-chair of the J Street PAC board, Victor Kovner.
Good morning. My name is Victor Kovner. I'm a founding member of the board of J Street and co-chair of our Political Action Committee. Ambassador Saeb Erekat, the chief Palestinian negotiator, a passionate supporter of the two-state solution and a good friend to J Street, was scheduled to join us today. Unfortunately, we learned just a few days ago that he is unable to make the trip. But we're very, very grateful that his colleague, Ambassador Man Rashid Erekat, another great friend of J Street, was able to step in and join us on short notice. Ambassador Erekat is Chief Representative of the General Delegation of the Palestinian Liberation Organization to the United States. He has dedicated his life to bringing about a two-state solution for Israel and Palestine. Let me just say that again, a two-state solution for Israel and for Palestine. As a pro-Israel American Jew, it is a high honor to introduce him today. Over the course of his career, Ambassador Erekat has served as a leading Palestinian diplomat and negotiator, attending peace talks and representing the Palestinian people in countries around the world. Last fall, Ambassador Erekat joined Jeremy Benavy on a joint speaking tour in the Pacific Northwest, a first of its kind between an American and Palestinian leader. Speaking to packed houses and meeting with Jewish and Palestinian communities in Seattle and San Francisco, they helped showcase the value of open debate and working together to find common ground for progress. As Jeremy and the ambassador wrote together in the Seattle Times, these discussions allow us to recognize our common humanity and interests. They are vital if we are going to move forward toward an acceptable solution that both sides can claim. Our main focus must be the future and how we can finally reach an arrangement that will satisfy the national aspirations of both peoples. Ambassador Erekat also knows firsthand that negotiating compromise and peacemaking are built on principled disagreements and critical debate. Now, that hasn't stopped some figures in the American public from charging that pro-Israel organizations that associate with him and other Palestinian leaders are somehow outside the tent. Ambassador Erekat, on behalf of J Street, I cannot think of anything more important for the pro-Israel, pro-peace movement than continuing to engage with you toward our common purpose. That is why we are so honored to have you here to speak with us today. So in the spirit of our shared commitment to peace, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Ambassador Erekat.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Victor. I don't think I will need my glasses. I'll put them on when I need them. Good morning to all of you. It is an honor and pleasure to be here today. I'm filling in for Dr. Saeb Erekat, who really planned to be with you. Unfortunately, for some unforeseen reasons, he could not make it to this conference. So it is an honor to speak at your 6th annual conference. Congratulate you. A few years ago, not too many people thought that you will last that long, but here you are doing what you have to do, which is to serve the cause of peace between Palestinians and Israelis in the Middle East. I know how much criticism has been directed at J Street for inviting PLO officials and Palestinian officials to speak at your venues and activities. And my dear friend Jeremy came under attack when we were on our tour just last October in San Francisco from a usual source of criticism for associating with me and being with me on that joint tour that took us to Seattle, San Jose, and San Francisco. The role J Street is playing today is very important. We do not agree as Palestinians with everything that J Street is advocating. We do not agree with some of the narrative. However, there is a very strong shared value and agreement between us, which is there is no way out for this conflict between Palestinians and Israelis but the two-state solution. Now, this seems to be getting difficult every day. Unfortunately, the current policies or the policies of the current right-wing Israeli government is making things more difficult on the ground to realize that objective of two states, Palestine and Israel, living side by side in peace and security. The Israeli government, the current Israeli government, is acting with total impunity, defying international law, defying signed agreements and violating signed agreements with the Palestinians, and also undermining the creation of a Palestinian state that will put an end to the conflict and will put an end to all historical claims. This is something that people tend to forget here. President Abbas has repeatedly said that the agreement we are seeking with Israel will not only end the conflict, but it will also end all historical claims between the two peoples. This is very important for you to remember. This shows you that our objective of creating a Palestinian state is not a tactical objective. It is a strategic objective. When we made the historic compromise in 1988 to accept the creation of a Palestinian state in the West Bank, the Gaza Strip with East Jerusalem as its capital, we accepted the creation of a state on 22% what used to be historic Palestine. Now that was a very painful compromise for us. We still are committed today to that painful compromise. However, we cannot compromise on the compromise. I enjoyed what the panelists or the guests who were here earlier, a very fine group of people whom I had the pleasure of working with. Ambassador Indyk, I've met him maybe the first time in 1993, 94, when he worked for the Clinton administration. Rob Malley on 2 occasions. And they both spoke about one state versus two states. Now, if this current Israeli government and its supporters in this country do not want a two-state solution, what do they want? They want one state with equal rights? Fine, let's go for that. If this is what they want, we are willing to accept that as a solution to the conflict. However, you all know that this is not what they are exactly seeking to achieve. They are trying to prolong the conflict, to sustain the status quo, and to continue building illegal settlements, continue to swallow more Palestinian land, and to, once and for all, destroy any possibility for the establishment of a Palestinian state. Now, this is an outcome that neither you nor us are working to achieve. And today, despite all the actions that Israel is taking on the ground, we continue to be committed to a two-state solution, because what we are having today is one state with two systems, where we have an occupation, a settlement enterprise, and a population that does not have any control over its life and is still under military occupation. So when we talk about two-state and one-state, we have to be careful, because the alternative to a two-state is not going to be favorable to either Israelis or Palestinians. And that's why we share that with J Street, and we commend you for your courage, the work that you are doing among the American Jewish community, the work you are doing with Congress, with the government, to continue to drive this message across, and to continue to rally support for the two-state solution. True, on the ground, it's fading away. However, again, there is no other solution that will put an end to the conflict and allow both Palestinians and Israelis to develop their national identities and to be good neighbors and to turn the page and open a new chapter in their lives. Now, of course, we cannot ignore the recent changes that took place in this country, the new administration, the confusion about one state, two state, then back to we like a two state. You know, everybody is confused here. We are confused as much as you are. It's going to be difficult to predict the course of action that this administration is going to take. However, as Palestinians, and we have not been approached yet by this new administration, believe it or not. They have approached Arab countries in the region. They have sought the advice of Arab diplomats in this city about the future of the region, and they still are calculating or waiting for the right time to approach us. We have had indirect contacts with them through third parties. The highest level meeting that took place between us and the new administration was when the CIA director visited the West Bank 2 weeks ago and met with President Abbas. However, we are ready to engage this administration. We are ready to engage this administration based on mutual respect, international law, long-standing US positions that do not condone or support settlement activities, and does not turn their eyes away from any violations or action that Israel takes to undermine the prospects of peace between Palestinians and Israelis. So the talk about transferring the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem is a sensitive issue. Jerusalem is important to Arabs, Muslims, Christians, Jews, and Israelis. We understand that. Our vision of Jerusalem as Palestinians, a city of peace that will be opened to all the followers of the three monolithic religions, that all religions have the right to protect and preserve their holy sites. This is our vision of Jerusalem, not a divided city as is today, where East Jerusalem is a totally different sector. What we envision Jerusalem to be is the capital of all capitals for both Israelis and Palestinians. Our vision for Jerusalem is a vision of peace, coexistence, and tolerance. And that's what we want to continue to promote. The United States cannot take any unilateral action to undermine an issue that is agreed between Palestinians and Israelis to be decided in final status negotiations. Neither West nor East Jerusalem are recognized by any country in the world as being the capital of Palestine or of Israel. So we really need to sit down Palestinians and Israelis in order to sort out this problem. Any emotional decision to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem is going to have very, very negative repercussions and could seriously complicate and undermine any future efforts to resolve the conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis. We have made our position clear to the new administration, directly and indirectly. And I hope that this administration will be wise enough to understand how sensitive and delicate is the issue of Jerusalem and leave it to the parties to reach a final agreement on the future of the city. You hear many talk about outside in, inside out. They spoke before about economy first. They spoke before about security first. They spoke before about peace with the Arabs first, and now we are hearing this once again, that they are trying to first make peace with the Arab countries. And I don't like the description, with all due respect, that was used earlier of Sunnis, Sunni countries. I am a Sunni Muslim, but I never really thought of myself as a Sunni Muslim until recently when they started talking about Shia, Sunni, Salafist. I am a Muslim. And any attempt, I urge people here not to further the divide among Muslims by describing some to be Shiites and some to be Sunnis. It is time that we stop that. If you look at the Arab countries, 22 Arab countries, 20 of them are Sunnis. Iraq is not divided. Iraq, the population is Shiite and Sunni, majority Shiite and Sunni. Lebanon is a different situation of coexistence where Christians and Muslims share the country. So what is the purpose of continuing to describe the Arab world as being divided between Sunnis and Shiites, our allies, the Sunnis? I reject that, and I urge everybody to be careful about these descriptions. We don't want more religious sectarian strife in our region. We've had enough. And this is an issue here that, many maybe in the administration think that it could be done. Let's bring the Saudis, let's bring the Emirates, let's bring the Gulf countries and try to make them sense this common danger with the country, the regional power in the region, Iran, and hopefully maybe Israel can manage to convince them to accept to make peace with them first before they make peace with the Palestinians. This has been tried many times before. It did not work. Even if there are certain circles who want to do that in the region, it's not going to happen. It's going to be difficult to justify to Arab peoples in all these countries why their governments are normalizing peace with Israel before the Palestinian conflict, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is not resolved. Instead of doing that, instead of circumventing the Arab Peace Initiative, let's push the Arab Peace Initiative that will enable Israel to have peace not only with 22 Arab countries, but with 57 Arab and Muslim countries, and end the conflict with the Palestinians, normalize relation between Israel and its Arab neighbors and the Muslim world at large. This is the best approach to resolve the conflict. Now, I don't want to talk much, but I want to touch on the issue of anti-Semitism and tell you all, if you don't know, that I am a Semite. So you have to understand, I am a Muslim Semite, and we have to all work together to make sure that these bigots, racists, anti-Semites, Islamophobists do not succeed in this country. We know history. We know history very well. It's not a surprise when a mosque is attacked or torched that the first to come to condemn it are American Jews in this country. And it was not a surprise to see a group of Muslim charities raise $100,000 last week to repair damage to Jewish cemeteries. This is a fight that we would like to see our Christian brothers in this country also join us. There is no place, no room for bigotry. Anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and those who are exporting fear should not prevail and should not succeed. We want this country to continue to be the example of tolerance between different religions, different ethnic grounds. And I respect Senator Chris Murphy, but his opposition to the Islamic travel ban should not be only because he supports Israel. It should be because it violates US principles and values. It's not enough to say, I am doing this because I want to protect Israel, I want to protect the existence of Israel. It's because it undermines the very basic foundation that this country was built on. So, Jeremy, dear guests and friends here, we will continue to work with you. We will come under attack, you will come under attack, I will come under attack. However, we do have a fundamental shared value to see an end to this conflict between Palestinians and Israelis. We talked about your children and you talked about my children. I want Palestinian children and Israeli children to have a better future and a better life. And we only can do that if we put an end to this perpetual conflict based on a two-state solution, Palestine and Israel. A viable, sovereign, democratic, contiguous Palestinian state that can live side by side with Israel in peace and security. Security for both, because we need security. And this is not a slogan. Believe me, it's not a slogan. This is a very solid commitment on the part of Palestinians, the PLO, the Palestinian leadership, to continue to work with you to promote our joint message and to achieve our joint objectives. Thank you very much.